All right, good evening, everyone. It is 7 p.m. We're going to get things going here. Just want to welcome everyone to Town Hall. Today is Monday, December 19th, for our joint work session with the school committee on budget discussions. But first order of business is the pledge to the flag. Next on the agenda is the land acknowledgement statement, which I will read. The town of South Kingstown pays homage to the indigenous people and land on which the town is now located. Let this acknowledgement serve as a reminder of our ongoing efforts to recognize, honor, reconcile, and partner with the Narragansett tribe whose land and water we benefit from today. Next, we have the roll call. If you would, Susan Flynn.
Council President McEntee,
Here.
Council Vice President Marin,
Here.
Councilwoman Bergner,
Here.
Councilwoman Alley, Councilwoman Rose.
Here.
All council members are present. Let the record reflect that School Committee Chair Whitford, School Committee Vice Chair Brusso, School Committee Woman Fish, School Committee Woman Massinanti, School Committee Man Restivo, and School Committee Woman Vetter are also present.
Thank you, Susan.
Just for the record, I spoke with Ms. Boyd this afternoon. Because this is Hanukkah, she chose not to be here tonight.
Thank you, Mike. All right, before we get into budget discussions, we do have a swearing in of a new SK police officer. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to you. Jim Manny.
Thank you, Council President. We're pleased to announce that a new South Kingston police officer graduated the Rhode Island Municipal Academy on this past Friday. I'll let the chief turn it over to the chief in 1 minute, but he lived in South Kingston, went to South Kingston High School. He's a soldier in the Rhode Island National Guard, an airborne soldier, so we're very proud, very lucky to have a person of this character to come to this town. So, Chief, I'll turn it over to you.
Council President, I'm going to ask our new officer, Andrew Riot, to come up, and also his girlfriend, before we swear him in. I'll give you a little bit of details. His girlfriend, Rebecca Heidel, is with us as well. So, as the manager stated, Andrew grew up in South Kingstown, graduated from South Kingston High School in 2010, and then went on to URI. He holds a bachelor's degree political science from URI and graduated in 2015. He was one of a group of officers that graduated this past Friday from the Municipal Training Academy. Today was his first day, so we're very excited to swear him in front of the council this evening, and excited for him to start his career with the South Kingston Police. So I'm just going to ask you to stand. Thank you.
Congratulations, Andrew. All right, this time we're going to begin our discussions on the budget. We do have a PowerPoint slide and presentation prepared by the town manager here, and then we're going to turn it over to the superintendent. So with that said, we're going to get into initial overview and introduction as to what's to come going forward in the next few months. Jim Manny, take it away.
Thank you again, Council President. Tonight, this is the initial budget hearing, which is really an overview of the process, an explanation of the process, and it provides a lot of facts and statistics of where the town and the state is right now financially, which will give the town council many tools to work with as we work over the next few months for this complex budget that we have. And the first thing I want to do is just acknowledge a couple of people that have worked very hard on this. One is to my left is Brian Sylvia, who is our finance director. He came on probably almost 6 months ago now, and he's been a tremendous asset, and I really put a lot of faith in him, 100% faith in his ability and efforts in getting us to this point. But also the person that worked very hard on this was Rose Bouchard, who's his deputy finance director. I would see them here at 7 o'clock at night. They'd come in on Saturdays. They just constantly worked on this, and they have a lot more work ahead of them in the next few months. But we would not be at this point with this great financial analysis that we have without all the hard work. So, Brian, when you're ready, we'll pull up the first page. We're going to go to the town first, correct? Yes, the town. Okay, we'll go to page 2. So tonight's, although it might look lengthy, it's not. We'll go through many of these slides. I'm not going to read every single word. It's just an overview and a guide for you to look at. So what are the objectives for tonight? So the budget process is based on data-driven and an understanding of the community's fiscal condition. It translates its needs and priorities into the services that we need in this town. The financial policies, the capital planning, the forecasting, which provides structure, context, and insight into our community's needs. The fiscal condition and ability to provide service now and into the future. But it's really about facilitating a discussion between the town council and the school committee members about the goals and objective of the town as a whole. Page 3 is a schedule of the meetings. So obviously today is our initial budget hearing, and then we go into January with the capital plans and so on and so forth. It's pretty self-explanatory. The final budget adoption is scheduled for Monday, April 24th, 7:30 p.m. So that's the end game. Page 4, the budget process. Our town charter requires this process. It really could have up to eight parts to this if the budget is contested. But you'll see number 1 is the initial budget hearing, which discusses the goals and objectives. Then comes the town manager's proposed budget. Then the town council's preliminary budget. We have public hearings, 2 of them. And then if there are any petitions to the council, what does that mean? Any qualified elector of the town may circulate a petition requesting the council to make an amendment to the budget. The petitions must be returned to the town clerk by April 21st with 25 signatures of qualified electors of the town. And the council, before final adoption of the budget, will consider and vote on each petition. 6, the final town council approval of the budget on or before May 1st. Then there could be referendum petitions. 7, following the final vote on the budget, any qualified elector may petition that a referendum be held on the appropriation of funds for the town or school department, provided that each petition shall contain signatures of no less than 200 qualified electors. 8 would be the budget referendum if needed. Page 5. The municipal budget. It really translates the community needs and priorities into the services that the town needs. It provides the short and long-term fiscal context to guide the decision-making by the town council. But what's very impressive is it's a transparent, deliberative process that informs the public, and the public could have input if wanted or needed. 6, what is funded? See on the left, these are the areas that are affected by the general revenue, general fund. Items, departments such as water, wastewater, the recreation such as the guild or the recreation center are not included in this because they get their funds through either enterprise funds or self-sustained grants and so forth. So you'll see what is funded on the left and how they are funded on the right. 7, the capital improvement program. That program will contain all the individual capital projects, equipment purchases, major studies that, local government, in conjunction with construction and completion schedules. It really provides a working blueprint for sustaining and improving the community's infrastructures. It coordinates our strategic planning, financial capacity, and physical development. A capital improvement program, a good one, is the cornerstone of government's long-term capital planning. But the CIP has 2 parts, a capital budget and a capital program. So what's the difference? 1, the capital budget is the upcoming year's spending plan for capital items. And 2, the capital program is a plan for capital expenditures that extends typically 5 to 10 years beyond the capital budget. 8, under Rhode Island General Law 45-5-2B, a city or town may levy a tax in an amount not more than 4% in excess of the total amount levied and certified by that city or town for its previous fiscal year. The town's levy increase in the current year, fiscal year 23, was 1.17% and has averaged 2.01% over the last 5 years. The growth through a tax base does not mean additional tax revenue will be realized, and we will get into that a little more when we talk about the revaluation of the town. This cap applies to the tax levy, not individual property taxes or tax rates. And finally, the 4% cap is not a legal limit on property tax transfers made to the school department. Page 9, maintenance of effort. This applies to our schools. Rhode Island state law requires that municipalities provide a minimum level of support for education on an annual basis, based on last year's budget. The state law specifies that there are 2 possible ways to calculate the amount a city or town must provide to meet the maintenance of effort. 1, the level funded amount of support provided in the prior year, or 2, if the district has a declining student population in amount equal to what was provided per pupil in the previous year. Page 10, Rhode Island's economic outlook. Unemployment as of October of 22 was 3.4%. This ranks 3rd in New England. In October of 21, the unemployment rate was 5%, but we all know what was taking place in that time period, a pandemic. Rhode Island's unemployment ranked 21st highest in the nation, with the District of Columbia as the highest, and Utah and Minnesota as the lowest. Rhode Island's job count has increased 12,700 from October of 21 And the personal income growth is projected to increase from current year 2023 through current year 2028. Page 11, the South Kingstown Economic Outlook. Unemployment as of October of '22 was 2.6%. The unemployment rate for Washington County was 2.7% as of that same time frame. We have a very strong real estate market for residential housing. Property revaluation was conducted as of December 31st of 2021. And per Rhode Island General Law 44.5.11.6, the town will conduct a statistical update every 3 years and full revaluation every 9 years. These numbers that follow really impressed me with this town. The municipal employees' retirement system, how it was funded up to June of 2022. The police are 87.8% funded. EMS is 132.8% funded. Other post-employment benefits trust funded status was 119.13%. There are many cities and towns that struggle in this state with unfunded liabilities, both in OPEB and pension. Talking to Brian, who's really seen many cities and towns in the state and looked at their financials, this town should be very proud of these numbers, that we have such strong financial backings in our OPEB and our pension. Continued on page 12 is South Kingston's economic outlook. Of the town's 17,534,000 total bonds payable, about 2,149,000 subject to the legal debt limit, which was $157,881,000 as of June 30th of 2022. As of July 1st of '22, the town's debt limit was adjusted to $210 million. That's because the reval, the average home went up about 35% in that revaluation. So I'm going to turn over to the brains of the operation, Brian, and let him go over all the numbers with the council. Now we start getting into the real nitty-gritty of the numbers. So, Brian, thank you.
Thank you, Jim. So where we left off on page 12, I was just going to take you through the calculation or where we stand on our fund balance. Just like to start by the first line item where it says draft. This is what will be appearing as of right now in the audited financials for the town as of June 30, 2022. It's still a draft. It has not been submitted to the Auditor General yet, so it is subject to change, so draft is listed on there. In any event, the fund balance at that time will be listed as $15,702,701. The town has appropriated $1.2 million within the operating budget of fiscal year '23. That leaves an adjusted fund balance at this time of $14.4 million. The operating budget of the town currently has a total revenues of $87,399,000. So that fund balance as a percentage of revenues equals 16.52%. And again, the recommended amount by the GFOA, Government Finance Officers Association, is 16.7%. That works out to 2 months of operations for cities and towns. On the next slide, this is the levy calculation from the current year that we're in. So the state requires cities and towns, when they're looking to change the levy on an annual basis, to submit both their proposed levy as well as what would be the effect of a maximum levy. So you're seeing here what has been the adopted column, that is the rate of 10.95%. And that's a levy increase. As you see, the percent increase on net levy is 1.17%. If the town were to go to the 4% levy in the current year, it would have had a tax rate of 11.25%, and that would have been the levy increase of 3.94. It's listed as that. I know that said this cap was 4%, but if we went to 11.26, it would have actually gone over the 4%, which is why it's listed at 3.94. Excuse me. On the next slide, on page 14, you'll see, as mentioned previously, the town has averaged a levy of 2.01% over the prior 5 years. Within that time frame, the town has averaged 25.39% of the levy to support town operations, and the school department has averaged 74.61% of the levy to support school department operations. On this slide, you'll see some of the drivers over the last 5 years. So this is taking the adopted budget from fiscal year 2019 and the adopted budget from the current year, fiscal year 23. You'll see some of the drivers. Current year taxes, that may be a little deceiving to people. That's only up 0.56%, but that's, again, over the last 5 years, the motor vehicle phase-out has occurred, and so even though taxes have gone up, we've taken in less taxes for that regard, and that's why you're seeing then state aid being up 26.91%, really a shifting of that revenue for the town, as it's now a reimbursement by the state. The other item of note is the fund balance usage, which is up over 700,000 in the last 5 years, from 550 in FY19 to 1.2 in the current year. Excuse me. On the expense side, the drivers have really been the municipal program, capital budget, and the reduction in debt service. As debt retires, obviously, debt payments go down. The next two slides are some financial data from Washington County. So this is looking at information from South Kingston, Narragansett, North Kingston, Westerly, and Charleston. There's a lot of information here. I'm not going to read it all to you. But some of the drivers for me is, again, we're looking at the levy per capita, which remains low compared to other communities. That's very low. That's 2,500, whereas you see the other communities all over 3,000. And again, a very item that should be noted is, again, the bond rating, which is AA1, and one of only 5 communities in the state that has that distinction right now, and the only one in Washington County. On the next page, page 17, some of the items of note would be debt. Again, that has been a topic of conversation in the town, as the town is considering several bond options. And you'll see here, again, the gross debt. I'd like to point out again on this, as noted, it's through fiscal year 21-22. About a year ago at this time, the town did issue $7 million of debt. So it actually, our debt that's listed there of $12,077,000 is actually up slightly. We're at 15, by the end of this fiscal year, we'll be at $15,800,000. But again, compared to other communities, the town's debt is very low, and it's a strength of the town. It really is at this point. Again, lots of other numbers. I'm not going to read through them all. If anybody has any questions, we can certainly go through. As mentioned, the town has several bonding options. That's before the school building committee presently. This being really the kickoff of the budget process. We thought it prudent to highlight these two options. Before you on this page is the new high school project, which is a projected cost of $125 million. This would result in a bond issuance projected at $117,445,000. The balance of the 125 would be funded through the state's PAYGO funding program, so that would reduce the actual issuance. On the next slide is a projection if the town were to opt for the renovated high school at a projected cost of $65 million. This would result in a new bond issuance of $60,155,000 due to the PAYGO funding from the state of $4.8 million. On this slide, which I'm glad this came up because I didn't actually have this answer the other day, last Monday, so I'm glad this came up. I know I was asked Monday, we would be over the 10% threshold that Moody's likes to see, under the 10% threshold if we were to issue $125 million. And based on this slide, we'd be projected to be under that threshold by year 3 of the pay down strategy. But this slide shows what we are, where we would be debt as a percentage of our total revenue over the next 5 years if we were to issue the new high school bond at $125 million. And on the next slide is similar slide, but for the renovated high school project at $65 million. On this slide, this takes you through the projected net overall obligations on an annual basis for the town based on the new high school of at a cost of $125 million. This would be the debt service payments averaging at $8.8 million. We'd be projecting state aid of $3.3 million, and the obligations of the town would be $5.4 million. And that, again, this is projected to begin in fiscal year '26. And again, as noted on the page, the issuance would be that $117 million because of the PAYGO. And on the next slide is the similar slide for now a high school renovation at $65 million. This has principal and interest payments at $4.5 million, estimated state aid at $2.1 million, resulting in annual obligations of the town of $2.3 million. This slide goes over the assessed value in billions of the town. You'll see some of the spikes listed, which are related to the revals. We had a big one this year, obviously, going from $5.1 billion to $6.8 billion. But also you see a spike up in 2020 as well as 2017. We did have a reval as well in 2014, but we did a 10-year look, and 2013 wasn't on the list, so you can't really see that. But the revals were in 2014, 17, 20, and 23. You can see the increases in valuations there. So budget developments to consider while we be developing the budget. We will be looking to maintain existing services. We will be looking to fulfill contractual obligations of the town. This includes a 2.5% increase for NEA, for Council 94, and IAFF. All of those agreements are in effect through June 30th, 2024. The IBPO contract expired on June 30th, 2022. A tentative agreement was reached, however, in December 2022. Another driver of the budget will be the capital needs of the town, employee benefits, as both healthcare and pension contributions are expected to increase, planning for future debt obligations, as noted previously, and potential new positions in various departments. Worth noting, if the town were to go up to the cap of its levy, the most the town could raise if going up to the 4% cap would be $2,997,388. Projected revenues. So on the 2023-2024 projected column, just for a note, I probably should have put that as a footnote, but the current year tax levy, that represents a 2% levy increase. I used what was, as I mentioned previously, the 5-year average was a 2.01%. So what you're seeing there is a 2% increase, just to put a baseline in. There really isn't much changes otherwise. There's some state aid increases, but we don't get the stated numbers for some time, so they're going to be subject to change. The only other item of note, again, is projected or assumed reduction in unassigned use of fund balance. It's a little early in the budget process, but that, considering that has escalated in recent years, it would be a benefit to try to get that down, but we have a long road before we get there. And finally, this is a summary of the pay-as-you-go budget of the town manager for the CIP that will be before this council for public hearing on January 4th and January 5th. If you go to the second page, you'll see that within the current year, the budget adopted was $1,806,500. And what has been proposed within this budget is $1,898,125.
All right, thank you, Brian. Thank you, Jim. Any questions for the manager or the finance director at this point from the council before we move on? Mike, go ahead.
If you can go back, Brian, to 23. Sorry. Old habits die hard. It's actually page 20. When you were talking about the debt service as a percentage of operating revenues, and we had talked about this at the last building committee meeting as well. When we were talking about the new construction, you had explained about the percentage of debt decreasing over time.
Yes.
But that doesn't seem to be the case with respect to the renovation. Is there a reason for that?
Well, renovations, it is increasing over, I think that's actually two different questions there, so if I could. No, well, what's in front of you on slide 20 is the obligations of the town. 100% those would be the obligations of the town. As an offshoot of that, what we were discussing was, again, building up a reserve, and the town already has a reserve to offset some of those funding. The town still has those obligations, and that 10.89% is the obligation. It's just, if we could curve it with some of the existing funds to reduce that in the first couple of years. So those are our numbers, those will be our obligations, but we do have funds from a debt service reserve to offset that slightly. With regards to the other slide and the renovation, that's reduced just because it's a much smaller bond issuance.
So you're not going to be able to see the decrease. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from council members at this point? All right, Mr. Prince, we're going to turn over to you for your presentation here.
Good evening. Thank you for having us. So tonight, we will present our pre-budget to the town council, the school committee, and the community. This is a very early look at what our budget process will be. It's a very early look about what conceptual framework we'll use to structure the budget. We will share some historical perspective of information. We will try to put that historical and current information that we share in some sort of context and hopefully allow people to follow along. I think it's important to frame the purpose of a budget. And a budget is really more than just about dollars and cents. A school district budget is a value statement. It's about what it is you value, what it is you support. It's about the direction that you're heading. It's about the mechanisms that you'll put in place to support learning. It's a value statement. It says these are the things we value. The conceptual framework that's used to frame the scope of the value statement or frame the scope of the budget are really about not necessarily priorities, but goals or outcomes. Another way of framing it is that if we pull on this lever over here, we'd be expecting something on this side to rise up. Right? So if we invest money in, say, for an example, reading coaches, we'd expect our reading scores to go up. Over time, the next couple of months, the next couple of weeks, as we try to get to the April 24th date, we'll have several opportunities through school committee meetings, through joint meetings with the town council, to have public discussion about the budget and the budget process. Through that timeline and through that process, we will continue to work with the town manager and his team in making sure that we're all in line and we're all on the same page and that we're moving in the same direction. I personally believe that we have an obligation and a responsibility to the taxpayers, to the students, to the parents. We come to those obligations and those responsibilities through different perspectives. Town council has a particular perspective. The school committee has a perspective. Town manager, the chief of police, And I too, as the superintendent, I bring a perspective to those responsibilities and obligations. In our last discussion that we had in this chamber, I was a wee bit annoyed. I was annoyed because I felt as though that my treatment, maybe not by intent, but by my own perception of that intent, was impactful and somewhat disrespectful. Now, a good friend, trusted friend, friends, pulled me over and said, "You know, Mark, you can't escape this blameless. You too own part of that conversation. You were somewhat snarky. You were somewhat off-putting." And so to that regard, I will say this. I apologize for my snarkiness. And if I offended anyone in the council that was there that night, or anyone at home, or even council members, town manager, or school committee members, I apologize. Our perspective and obligations dictate that we must be one South Kingstown. Regardless of the perspective we come from, we must be one. I am willing to recommit myself to that purpose. And my task is to do it for the students, and for the teachers, and for the families. And yours is to do it for all of South Kingstown. And you guys, for the schools, the teachers, the students, and the families. And the chief, for everyone in town, and the manager, for everyone else. We all own a little bit of that conversation. I apologize for my part. That said, I'll turn it over to Raquel. She'll begin talking about some perspectives, and then I'll come back and talk to the committee in a few minutes.
So just to review why we're here tonight, the pre-budget consult. You heard the town manager and town finance director go over the requirements with the town. Tonight we'll be going over our responsibilities to present to the town council from a school perspective. We are required to present total expenditures, projected enrollment with staffing and facility requirements, estimated enrollment and payments to charter school, and then any necessary or mandated changes in school operations and programs. As the superintendent said, this is very early in the process. We'll be giving you historical data and try to frame how we're going to work through this within the next 2 months.
So as I said before, a budget is a value statement. And you need a conceptual framework to frame the value statement. And this is a framework that we began developing when we first presented our RICAS results. It's evolved some since then, and it will probably evolve before we get to the final stages of the budget. But there are some key drivers in here that we think are important to touch on. For example, we are going through a restructuring. We have closed one elementary school, or restructured it to be a preschool. Looking to finally close it at some point. We are closing Curtis Corner Middle School and combining it with Broad Rock Middle School to create a 6th through 8th grade middle school. When I say restructuring, that's what I'm talking about. Besides restructuring, we also have to align our resources. And in a school department, your resources are limited. People, and time, and money. How do you assign your people? How do you use your time? And how do you spend your money? In my view, coming in from the outside, I look and I see we have these resources, but what would happen if we strategically align them with a more clear direction? And this is the perfect opportunity to have that conversation. Because if we're restructuring the schools, then let us align our resources for the greater good. And so one of the things that we're going to examine through this budget process is how to align those resources where there's clear connection. We also need to examine our internal capacities around MTSS, or tiered structure of support, the safety net, so to speak, the net that's there for struggling learners. We have some things in place, but some of those things could be tightened up for efficiency purposes and for better results for students. So that's a difficult conversation that we have to have internally, but it's one that I think this is the time to have. We have to keep our eye on closing the unfinished learning gaps. During the RICAS presentation, I reported out on the NAEP scores and how those NAEP scores impacted by South Kingstown, were impacted in South Kingstown. And on average, it was about, we missed on average somewhere between 10 to 12 weeks of school over those 2 years of experience. So that's about a total of 20 to 24 weeks, which is about a half a year's worth of schooling. So every student that's right now sitting in a 5th grade classroom, if you go back to 3rd grade, 2nd grade, and then project forward, they're not at 500 and something odd days of instruction, they're at less than that. Those gaps exist. Those are real gaps. Those gaps are gaps in knowledge, those are gaps in skills, those are gaps in social emotional development. Those are gaps that we somehow must fill. Equally to that, there's this statement about support for teachers and students and their mental health. Here's what's critically important for certain kids at certain milestones in life. Social interaction and social peer development is important. And if you miss those things, it can be harmful long term. So we have to pay attention to social emotional learning and what that means from a student side and a student perspective. We also have to acknowledge the fact that the pandemic impacted us all, and it impacted our staff and their families. The state has made a big push in working with all of the major associations in education, superintendents and teachers and principals associations, elementary and high school level and middle school levels, mental health throughout the state. RIDE is making a big push to start this conversation about support for teachers and their mental health because of the pandemic and the resulting things of the pandemic. And we too have to pay attention to that. And so there may be some grant opportunities out there. There may be some professional learning opportunities out there. But this also provides us an opportunity to kind of look at that and see how we can, again, align those resources. We must continue to build our teachers' knowledge and invest in their capacity. A lot of people often asked me when I was in my other consulting life, they would ask, how did Massachusetts, what was some of the things they did to really get up there, to be like the top school district in the country? Like, what did you guys do? And I'll tell you, we invested in people. That's what we did. We grew people. We invested in them. Teachers' knowledge and skill grows. Student achievement grows. So we want to continue to build that. And lastly, and probably most important, assessments drive instruction. We currently need to examine that system. There's possibly some cost-saving measures there, but it still needs to be unpacked and be discovered. It's an opportunity for growth that's not being pushed on within the school system. So we need to look at that. All in all, these things are the conceptual framework we're using to structure our budget, and we're using to divvy up our resources, time, money, and people, and the same focus on the cause. As a community, we are very fortunate. We have some fantastic teachers. They are hardworking, they are dedicated, they are committed, they are solution-focused. They give of their time, they give of their spirit. They give the clothes off their back if they have to, literally. And so we want to continue to support them. And I think this This framework provides that for them and equally provides us an opportunity to accelerate learning for students. So I will pass it on to Raquel. She will move on to the next stage, and I'll be back soon.
So the superintendent just reviewed our overall goals and objectives for the next budget year. One thing that has been a shift, and we've transitioned slowly into it, is the Rhode Island Education Accountability Act of 2019. Due to the pandemic, we were able to transition over several years. This really shifts, it's a different way of budgeting and also a different way of responsibility. It shifts the care and control over a school facilities, their operations and equipment to the school principal. With regards to the budget, a principal prepares the budget that is grounded in data, which is driven by the school improvement plan, which is developed in conjunction with the school improvement team. The budget is developed at that level. Then it is presented to the superintendent for consideration. The superintendent takes into account all plans that are given to him from the schools, as well as the operational expenses that we are required to maintain, as well as new initiatives. That budget is then presented to the school committee for consideration. So again, this is something that is fully implemented and will be presented as part of the 23-24 budget. I'm going to provide you with some historical data that we're looking at, and it gives us an idea of moving forward in the next 2 months, what we're looking at. There are many different data points that we review with regards to enrollment. Rhode Island Department of Education has the funding formula, which is based on residential average daily membership. Special education data points are done on December enrollment. What we're looking at right now is what we have to compare, which is our October 1 enrollment. October 1 enrollment is provided to districts, and it really, I don't know if you can see it, that smaller box right there really pulls it out and says, these are the students that are within district. October 1 provides for in-district students, as well as students enrolled in outplaced, alternative, and transition programs. What you're going to see is in the different colored squares is how we analyze enrollment. We look at trends, and we also look at our NESDIC data when we're looking at growth going forward. Another requirement that we're having to present tonight would be our enrollment in CTE state and charter schools. What you have here is historical data as well as our current enrollment in CTE state and charter schools. The billing is done on a quarterly basis. The data in 23 is really what is in the first quarter. The per pupil, it's a little small, you can't see it. Those are determined on an annual basis. For our state and charter schools, those are given to us as part of the funding formula in January. So the budget is based on preliminary data. It is then finalized after the lottery, so we get our final counts for our state and charter schools with the final state aid, which is in April. We're also looking at our staffing. What we want to point out here is we do have historical data, but 22-23 is everybody that's on staff as of today. There are open positions, but we didn't include them because the superintendent and the principals are continuously analyzing to see if those are necessary. At times, there may be new students that come in that require additional services, so it's constantly changing. We wanted to give the council an idea of where we stand today, all staff. One of our biggest concerns is revenue state aid for education. We've talked about this at the last council meeting last year. We've been held harmless for 3 years. We had discussions with Rhode Island Department of Education. They're not able to provide us with any additional information until the governor's budget comes out in January. Our concern is If we are not held harmless, we will see a reduction in state aid because our enrollment is dropping. But there are also parts that go into the funding formula that do not have to do with enrollment. One is the student success factor. Historically, Rhode Island Department of Education has determined student success factor based on free and reduced lunch status. Due to concerns from the federal government, they're looking to provide a new data point or a new calculation. They have yet to share how they're going to do that, so that is something that will change. Also, the state share overall is based on the town's ability to pay, and it also has to do when you have a reval. It won't happen this year, but in future years, it will impact the state aid for education. Overall, this is what our data looks like historically for revenue that comes into the district to support the school department. What we tried to do is pull out any additional funds that are considered one time or really over the life of the pandemic. We'll be phasing out any additional funds or in very small amount in 23, 24, and those are the ending of ESSER 3. We've been following the regulations with regards to ESSER and also making sure that we do not create a structural deficit by putting operational expenses into these one-time funds. Our areas of concern, again with revenue, are state aid, and we've been level funded for a few years for town appropriation for education. So that is our concern going forward into the budget year. When we're looking at our total expenditures, again, I have to read it off my screen. Our major increases really, when 90% of the budget is salary and benefits, because we are a service organization, any increase in contractual obligations will increase our expenses. We have an increase in transportation contractually of 4%. We have increases in out-of-district transportation. We have yet to find out the total cost for that. We have our mandated expenditures, which are our special education mandated expenditures, as well as facilities and maintenance that we're required to spend 3% of our operational budget on. And also, what is the impact on expenditures if we do hit the funding cliff with state aid, and if we are again level funded by town appropriation for education? I'm going to turn it over to the superintendent, who will discuss unfunded mandates and any changes in school programs and operations.
So the term unfunded mandates is just what it is. These are mandates that come down either through the federal government or through the state, sometimes through policy, sometimes through programs. Sometimes these mandates are funded as seed money or seed programs, and then over time, the district is supposed to absorb the costs and build up the costs while the decrease of the seed money goes down. So these are just a few of our unfunded mandates and the costs they are to the district. McKinney-Vento, which is the Homeless Act. If families in the community or people in the community become homeless and they find shelter in another community, we are to transport them from that other community back to South Kingston, where they can have the existence or the preponderance of their life still intact. Right now, we're on average to spend somewhere between $60,000 to $70,000 this year just on McKinney-Vento Homeless Act. Personal literacy, math, and behavior plans, which is a requirement of RIDE that needs to be placed. We must hire people to do that. That's a mandate that's been in place for several years. We do that at a cost of $240,000. Professional development costs that come with policies and things set forth by RIDE, set forth by the committee, and set forth by the federal government right now on average is about $59K. That doesn't include the time we set aside, that's through the contract, or that doesn't include teachers coming forward who say, I'd like to take this URI course, or I'd like to study more about this or learn more about this because I'm curious about it, or because I want to become a better practitioner. None of those things are included in that 59 total. This is just through policy, this is just through state mandate, this is just through programming alone. Our transportation cost, considering our geographical size, is about $5 million. The cost for new curriculum programs that were mandated by RIDE, with an additional one on the horizon for social studies, were about $106K. With that $106K, there's also requirements around professional development. Now, there was some seed money provided by RIDE to absorb some of this, but it was just that, seed money, and the rest of the monies now have to come forward from the district. So we're making about $106K on that mandate from RIDE in the area of curriculum. The Right to Read Act, which went in place in 2019, and we have to 2025 to get teachers up to speed in the areas of being proficient practitioners of teaching literacy and a structured literacy way. Right now, we're about $160K in on that, and we still have another year to do that. We have till 2025. Now, with that, we can't require folks to do it over the summer. We can't require folks to do it after school. We have to support teachers to do it during the daytime. We currently have 78 teachers, which is cohort number 3, going through that process. This is a nice figure just for the Right to Read, but this doesn't include the additional $60,000 for substitute teachers in order to free up the teachers to go off to learn how to do the Right to Read and become proficient in structured literacy. Yes, we can offset some of that by the URI program that we have with RIDE, with URI, where we're taking primarily at West Kingston Elementary School, but a few other schools as well, where we're taking a lot of their student teachers and practicum students on certain days, and because they're working in those classrooms every single day for set hours, on the days that those teachers are out, that practicum student or student teacher can step up and absorb the classroom, which is fantastic because we're giving back to the field and we're helping train future teachers. But that too comes at a cost. Program of basic education, right now, we're funding a position out of the program, the BEP, that wasn't in place in the past. One of the things that we're going to have to discuss, and this is the tune of 94, one of the things that we're going to have to discuss as we go through the budget process, probably not for this year, but for the coming next couple of years, is how do we align the system to meet the other requirements of the BEP and the things that we are not doing right now. Some of that is restructuring. And we should probably do those things while we're doing this process now. But some of it are cost maneuvers. And it could be cost trade-offs. But that's an internal conversation that we're beginning to have. And lastly, as I mentioned earlier, that assessment systems, and there's some opportunity there. But right now, of our current assessment system, which is again mandated by RIDE, we're on about 24K. So all in all, for unfunded mandates, we're in the area of $5.7 million. These mandates, again, come down from RIDE or come down from the federal government or our seed programs, where they give you grant money up in the beginning, and over time, the district has to absorb the cost. These are things that we don't have the luxury of not doing, especially the seed money. If we've taken the seed money, we can't walk away from it. That's a big no-no. But if RIDE pushes out a new pieces of curricula, which they will for social studies, and they may offer up some seed money with that to buy curriculum materials or do some training, and more than likely they will. But then we would have to match that over time to keep that going, because 1 or 2 years of some seed money does not make folks proficient practitioners. You need time. Right? These new, again, just using social studies as an example, it's 64 pages of standards, pre-K through 12. That's not something that you're going to master in 2 years. It's going to take some time. Some structural changes that we talked about, I mentioned earlier. I did talk about the 6th through 8th grade in Curtis Klerner closing in June. Our 5th grade will then remain at our elementary schools. We are examining our space, and we are examining how we use space. And we are keeping a close eye on enrollment to ensure that we don't get too far down the road. When the fifth grade returns to the elementary school next year, we will have somewhere between 3 and 4 classrooms available. And that's it, at the elementary level. Every other classroom in the district would be full. Talked about new curriculum. We've already talked about social studies, and the latest and greatest initiative from secondary folks and RIDE is that the requirement of 2 years of a world language in order for students to graduate from high school. They have yet to determine when the implementation of that is. My true hope and pray is that it's not this year, because that would be impactful for a 12th grader, for he or she to walk across the stage. And I also hope that it doesn't happen to our current 11th graders, that they give us some time to structure it in a way where it supports kids. I think the last thing to do is to turn to a sophomore and say, yeah, I know you have this great plan of how you're going to get out of high school, but oh yeah, you have these 2 years of a world language to put on you now, and so your plans are just gone haywire. So my hope is that cooler heads will prevail with that requirement, and that we'll be able to structure that implementation of that where it's not harmful to kids. But that is something that we'll work on with RIDE and continue to keep an eye on how that mandate impacts what we do. The last thing I think is, the last few things I think it's important for us to realize is how we are doing overall. How are we as a community doing? And so I often like this: the students can gain this foundation, this is in reference to learning, only when the curriculum is intentionally and coherently structured to develop content knowledge within and across grade levels. Like if you had to say, Mark, geez, what do you, in your view, with your fresh eyes, what do you see as an area of immediate growth for us as a community of learners? And I would say making sure that our content is structured up and structured across. We want to try to make sure that what's happening in third grade classroom A is also happening in third grade classroom B, and also happening in third grade across town. And in some instances, in some cases, it is. But in some instances, in some cases, it's not. And not to pick on third grade, but I just use that as an example. And so we're hoping to, through this process, align all of our systems and our resources, and that's one of the things I believe we can align and go through this process. Currently, the ELA scores for the state are 31%. We are at 44% for English language arts. We have one 5-star elementary school, we have a 4-star elementary school, we have several 3-star elementary schools, and we have one school that we're working to continue to grow in. We are in achievement-wise, we are in a really good place. Growth-wise, we could use some acceleration with rigor. And what I mean by that is that if you close school today, they say the student take the RICAS, they did great, they just passed with a 500, you close school today and you open it up tomorrow, with the current growth trajectory, the student would struggle passing the test next year. Right? Because of the gaps with unfinished learning, they may be able to get past, again, we'll use third grade as an example, they may have enough information, skill, and knowledge to get past that third grade, but do they have enough information, skill, and knowledge to get past the fourth grade? In the fourth grade, you have more standards. In the fourth grade, you have a little more rigor. In the fourth grade, you have longer texts, and so on and so on and so forth. And so growth becomes important as well as achievement. You need to have both. And so if a student is scoring just at 500 around the third grade, that's not enough growth in order for them to achieve proficiency in fourth grade. Ideally, you need them to be around 506, 510, and it'd be fabulous if they're up at 515. But if your student is walking in at 500, when they walk in for the fourth grade assessment, they could run into some stuff. And so we need achievement as well. We need growth as well as achievement. Here are our RICAS scores broken down by a protected class. It also has the exact target limits. One of the things that we don't talk about often, but we have to, when we Rhode Island, the state of Rhode Island, bought the RICAS from the state of Massachusetts, which is formerly the MCAS, you left off the target. See, the requirement for the MCAS is you want 65% of all of your federally protected classes to be at or meet or above the expectation. And so this is the 65% marker. These are our federal protected classes, and this is where we fall in. American Indian, 9%, Asian, 44, Latino, Hispanic, 19, 2 or more races, 35, white, 47, and African American, 1%, just means that we didn't have enough to report out. But as you can see, the target is 65%, and this is where we're landing. Again, this is good. We're in a great spot. But clearly we have a little more work to do, but that's okay, because I'm confident we'll make it. This does not deter me, frighten me whatsoever. And it shouldn't you guys either. This is still a new assessment. These are still new standards. These are still folks that haven't had time to really dive deep into it, and they're doing fabulous, fresh out the gate. Be mindful that the standards changed in 2021, and this is what we're doing without giving them a lot of support. So that's why I'm encouraged by it. The infrastructure hasn't been built, and look at where we're at, 44, 19, 35, 47. What happens after we build the infrastructure of support around those new frameworks and unleash the great teachers that we have? I'll tell you what will happen. That 65% will be a lot closer than what it is right now. So I'm not remotely concerned. I know if we invest in our people, we'll get the result we want. Statewide MCAS scores, RICAS scores for mathematics was at 27%. We were overall at 38%. And again, when you look at that by protected class, again, the infrastructure is not in place. These standards also changed in 2021. Folks haven't had time to dive deeply into it. The mathematics curriculum changed. Haven't had time to dive deeply into it. And our middle school teachers, our 6th through 8th grade teachers, they have a brand new curriculum that they're implementing this year. And they're just getting started. So I'm pleased with this right now. And I think we're going to hit the 68% marker. Lastly, we'll go back to our conceptual framework. And I'll just say that, this is the very beginning of a conversation that will last several weeks. This will change over time, as I said. I began with two things. One thing, apologizing for my actions, but also asking, recommitting myself to One South Kingstown. So now I want to ask you guys to join me, because I can't do it alone. Teachers can't do it alone. The students can't do it alone. We have to all do it together. Our budget is an attempt to build for tomorrow. Our SBC, the School Building Committee, is an attempt to build for tomorrow. We're building for a future. South Kingstown. One South Kingstown. So join us, join me in recommitting to that. You keep me honest about it, I'll keep you honest about it. And the public will keep us all honest about it. That's my shtick. Cal, take us home.
It's just a review, just a calendar of what we'll be doing over the next couple of months. We'll be bringing our final budget to you in February. And thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Raquel. Very informative. Are there any questions from council members for the school staff at this point? Any questions from the school committee members? Go ahead, Michelle.
Mr. Prince, I have two academic questions for you, which may need some research on all of our parts. as an educator with more years in education than I'll admit in this environment, with the new social studies standards coming on board, have you heard any noise from RIDE about following that up with a social studies assessment? Like they did when they brought the science standards on board?
No, what they've done is they've put these standards out there in one, you can look at them individually by content area, or you can look at them as one big giant document. For example, you could go and say, I just want to look at the civics, or I just want to look at the geography standards, or you can look at all what they have. And right now, they're in the feedback stage from stakeholders. So this is the opportunity for folks to go and examine the standards and provide feedback to RIDE about thumbs up, thumbs down, likes, dislikes, and so on and so forth. They will then take that feedback back, make whatever internal deliberations they have, and then move it on through the process. Implementation for those may be a year, depending on the stakeholder feedback and the level of activity and the level of agitation around it, or it may be sooner. And then the question is about how will those standards be assessed, and that's a really good question. My guess is that there'd be some sort of something. But is that something attached to ELA? We don't know. Is that something, a separate test? We don't know. So I don't think I've been very helpful, but I answered your question.
My other question is, I attended quite a few of the meetings with RIDE when they were coming out with the new high school graduation requirements, and it was brought up repeatedly, the requirement for 2 years of world language for our high school students. Was there going to be any accommodations made for students with disabilities? And basically, it was no. I wonder if possibly that we might look into seeing if they would allow things like, okay, the students can get 2 credits of a world language, but take longer than 2 years to get it. That kind of environment.
The
Just putting that out there.
world language requirements is still very new. They just recently passed. They just passed after the election. So, you know, we'll wait to see what comes out of RIDE. I know that many of my superintendent colleagues have expressed to RIDE their views on this. I've certainly made my views known. It's still early in the process. And so, you know, my goal is to, you know, I can't yell at the rain anymore. The decision has been made. So my goal is to try to get on committees and try to work to try to influence an outcome that will help kids. One of the things I will credit RIDE and the commissioner for doing is really working to possibly beef up the world language teacher pool. So, you know, if we need a Spanish teacher, I will fly to Madrid, Spain, and interview him or her begrudgingly, but that's, you know, if that's what we have to do, I will volunteer to do that, to go to the Mediterranean in February while it's snowing and raining here to interview. But that's one of the things they did. They worked to kind of work to get international teachers and work to position the state in a way where you can hire international teachers, and one natural place is bilingual, bicultural folks in the area of world language. So I'll give them credit for that. That was, you know, they heard the cries from the field and they responded appropriately. And so if they continue along that track, I think we should be okay. Other questions from either group?
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments for school committee members? Christy, go ahead.
I just have more of a couple comments. One is, thank you for your sincere apology. I would think that everybody here appreciates that, so thank you. My second comment is, we talked a lot about the educational gaps, and I just wanted to note that, as you were saying, Mr. Prince, the average student missed 6 months, and so they're a little behind. Then you talk about our kids that have IEPs and special education who are already 6 months, a year, 2 years behind. Now you're tacking on another half of a year, and probably even more because they've been more significantly impacted without having the resources that they need. And the reason that I say that is because we can't afford to not support all kids, but especially those kids that are have been impacted even more so. Thank you.
All right. Any other comments, concerns, questions? All right, at this point, we're going to open it up to the public. So I just ask, we're going to do this on a first come, first served basis. I just ask that you state your name to the record. We're going to try to limit you to 5 minutes, but with that said, come on up.
Jim O'Neill, Matunic. Just a couple of basic questions. I couldn't quite see the board up there, so, Mr. President, if I could direct...
Go ahead, Jim.
Okay, thank you. What was the number that we had, the October students in the seats in South Kingston?
Jim, do you want to just move your mic a little bit? Jim?
Jim, just could you speak into the microphone?
I'm sorry, I'm usually so loud, I try to keep it far away. The number of students...
2488.
Pardon?
2488.
2488, okay. And while you're there, we've had pretty close to 190, 200 kids attend other schools out of district the last few years. Narragansett High School, North Kingstown, Charahoe, and the Met versus the charters. Do you have those numbers?
I do, and I can give you this PowerPoint presentation right after if you,
Okay, yeah, because
Yeah.
we did not have that.
Yep.
Okay, all right, if you would, thank you. What is your current pro forma wish list for the state aid education? What do you have in there, or have you?
for state aid coming into the district. It's really hard to predict. We haven't got any feedback from Rhode Island Department of Education if they're going to hold us harmless again. And that means for the past 3 years, we've not been, they haven't accounted for any reduction or increase in enrollment. If that happens, we will see a significant reduction in state aid. How much, I don't know, because they're also reviewing the calculation with regards to the student success factor.
You remember what the number was last year? Weren't we 4 million something?
So last year is for, the formula aid is 4.7 million.
4.7 million, okay. Yeah, this funding issue I bring up every year. You know, our school population's down, 35% or so. But from a high of over $10.6 million back in 2010, you just heard the number 4.7, almost 60%. I mean, there's something wrong somewhere here. And on the other side of that equation, the new money that goes in from the state to post and pre-secondary education, we don't get a piece of that either. So on both ends, we're losing money and not getting a piece of what the state has increased their total education budgets. I cannot figure it out. This is beyond me. A couple more easy questions. American Rescue Plan. Are we getting anything for operations or capital projects? I know we're looking at 8 or 9 million townwide, but anything going to the schools?
Raquel, that deals with the ESSER funds, right? A lot of that is American Rescue money.
We're currently in the second year of our ESSER funding. It comes with restrictions with regard to the need for educational loss that the superintendent talked about, as well as social emotional needs. Our 23-24 budget will be the ending or the last dollars for our ESSER funding. Also the focus will be around learning loss and social emotional.
Is there a dollar amount to that?
The process of reviewing our final amendment. We're bringing budget amendments back to the school committee. What do I think? Probably maybe 300,000-400,000 will be the last of our money. Again, that is the phase out of the positions that we have for the specific needs.
Okay. And anything with transportation costs at the federal level, you know, they're really trying to reimburse a lot of folks, a lot of cities and towns around the country. Anything with this state that can be directed towards our transportation costs, which are so huge because of the geography of this town?
There has been a lot of discussions, especially with neighboring districts, to see what we can do. I know the superintendent and has talked to surrounding superintendents who have also communicated the concerns that they have with transportation and the cost of it to Rhode Island Department of Education. We're going to try to be creative, but right now the only bonuses that they have are for regional transportation.
Yeah. I mean, statewide and federal, it's certainly trying to help out folks with heating costs, et cetera, et cetera. You would think that would be extended to our transportation costs for kids. All right, I'll leave you on that note. Thank you, Mr. President.
All right, thank you, Jim. All right, anyone else in the audience wish to speak? Come on up.
Happy holidays, everyone. I'm Keith Vorhaven. I'm your neighbor right over here on High Street. And this is Bridget Gilchrist. She's your neighbor down in Matunic. And we're here representing the Wakefield Concert Band tonight because you're talking about the budget. And we'd love to get back into the budget. There was a time when the Wakefield Concert Band was part of the budget. And we've taken on the challenge of funding ourselves. And we've been successful at it. But we've had to change some of the ways that we present music to our community, as in we're charging more money for it. And I guess I wanted to make certain that that was the direction you wanted the Wakefield Concert Band to go. Once you removed us from the budget, you kind of put us in a position where we had to focus more on our budget and less on making our music. And to echo Mr. Prince's statement that the budget is a value statement, I wouldn't go as far as to say we're feeling undervalued. I'm feeling as though perhaps you aren't aware of what's taking place on our end of it. And to give you an idea of what music we present to our community, we have a summer series that we put on 5 shows. These are free of charge. Not free of expense, but free of charge. This is for our community, and we put on a Christmas show. Again, this is free of charge to our community. It's not free of expense. This year was our first year where we actually chose to spend money, charge money for our concert, because as a result of COVID, we're in a budgetary situation where our audiences have been reduced because COVID, perhaps you're aware of that. And venues that we played at for money have been reduced. We're getting back into that a little bit more, but we seemed to feel like the timing was right when we have everybody in the room to just give you an idea of how much of the community we'd like to be part of. We support the food bank, we support the music boosters. And when I say we support, we use our audience in an effort to solicit funds for these institutions in our community, because we see the value in it. We do want to be part of the community, and we're hoping that you can reflect some of the value you see in us in your budget. Would you like to add?
So I'm relatively new to Rhode Island as a full-time person here, but I don't know if you've ever been to the Wakefield Community Band concert. Any of you? Yes? Show of hands? Okay, so we are a group of musicians, teachers, professional musicians, amateur musicians, students from high school, as well as URI. There are roughly 70 people in our group right now, all from ages from high school to 99. And we feel very proud as a value to your community, our community. This is the Wakefield Concert Band. It's over 100 years old. What year was it started? 18?
The oldest picture we have of the band is from the 1890s.
So, and it offers an incredible amount of value to your community because of the artistic and the social climate, getting people involved. We have community concerts. People come from the community, they join the community. Anybody can join the community band. And we encourage everyone to do that. We have played at the tree lighting every year for 1,000,000 years. Yes? Been to the tree lighting? No? Okay. It's a wonderful event, and that's a free thing we send our band out to do in the freezing cold. We play at convalescent homes. We have small groups that go out into the community and play at convalescent homes. We're going to be playing with the high school band for the 300th anniversary at Memorial Day. We're going to actually sit with them, and they will be able to perform with us. We played at the River Fire last summer, and I think we got 10 members just from that performance. Everybody loved it. It was great. And we do those 5 concerts down by the sea, concerts by the sea. So what we are not trying to say, can you, give us millions of dollars like the school board is asking for. But what we are saying is we just need some support from our town for our band, that's all. Operating expenses and equipment, we need all sorts of things. And so we're trying to represent our town and to band together and knit our community together. And so if you can give us some support, we would appreciate it.
Thank you. Jim, something that potentially this fits into, a certain amount of money we
Roy.
appropriate every year in the budget is for outside agencies. And I was thinking maybe we could inform them on the process so that they could request an amount and sort of come to the council with a presentation related to that.
So I was going to ask, are you a 501c3? You are. Is that a new designation?
No, that's 5, 6, 7 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, and we have, the state does give us a grant of $1,000 a year that's sponsored by Susan Sosnowski, and that accounts for about 20% of our budget.
Okay. And what are some of your other expenses?
We have a stipend for our conductor. We have a PA system that we have to maintain. We have ads that we run to promote our concerts. We have printing costs, et cetera, et cetera. I can make our budget available to you,
Keith, I was just wondering if there were, because you're a 501c3, if there are other grants, statewide grants that you could be applying for and using.
I apply for everyone that I know about.
Okay.
If you would like to reach out to us or need to, you can find us on Facebook and you can Google Wakefield Concert Band. Thank you all for your efforts. I know this stuff isn't easy. I know it's a lot of work, and I know you're not in it for the money. So thank you all for doing this for the community, and happy holidays.
Thank you. All right. Anyone else in the audience wish to speak? I invite you to come on up.
Good evening, Doral Beasley. I received my APRA answer about positions in the school district. I got them last month, so it's about a month ago now. And when I put all the stuff out on the spreadsheet, and it looked like a month ago there were 30 unfilled positions. Is that still pretty much where you are right now? And is that due to the fact that you can't find people, or you're not sure whether or not we really need all those people at this point? I mean, if the people were there, would you hire them?
I don't believe it was 30 people. The challenges that some of the positions are posted, there are some challenges with trying to find applicants to apply for them. That's not unique to us, and
No, sorry.
it's a challenge throughout the country.
So the last 3 years, in the spring, we come in here, and I've brought up the fact that we've level funded the schools pretty much for forever. We've level funded the schools or increased the amount, but the last 4 or 5 years. But our school population continues to go down. So Mr. Prince said that you can fund on a per pupil basis. Are you considering this year asking the district to fund on a per pupil basis? I ask that because, 15 miles to our north in East Greenwich, they have a $45 million budget, and they have more students, and we have almost 70. And the majority of the differential, the vast majority, is about $15 million in compensation. Now, the only way we are reducing the number of schools, so you would think, you would think that we have fewer people in the district come next September. But at the same time, the report came out about a month ago, maybe not quite a month, that South Kingstown's school teachers have the highest average pay in Rhode Island, about $98,000. So, and they're all in contract. All 3 unions are in contract negotiations right now, as far as I know. Do they deserve 2% raises for the next 3 years when they're already the highest paid in Rhode Island? If we don't have all 5-star schools, we do have one 5-star school. But when I looked at the data for that school, the report for that school, that was the school that we had the highest amount of per student expenditure. It was like over $25,000 in Matunic we spent. Some of our other schools were getting $17,000. Maybe this year is the year for the school district to consider early retirement incentives for your employees. $123 million for the high school. It's not enough. Well, the $123 million for the high school might be not enough, but $123 million of bond and debt may be not enough, because that doesn't leave, the other 3 schools have immediate needs of like $18 million. So you can put the 18 on the 123 and have 140. So really your floor, in my estimation, your floor is like 140. Now 140 over 20 years at 4.25 is $5 million a year. So we were talking about we're all one. I like the phrase tonight that we're going to be one town, one school district, one town council. We're all going to work.
Earl, you are past the 5. Just want to ask you to conclude.
Going to wrap it up here. So we're all going to work together. So 140 million. You need $5 million a year to pay that debt over 20 years, level funded. If you have a budget $20 million more than another district that has more students. That's where the money has to come from. That's what you should work towards, to get that $5 million out of that budget permanently, so that it'll pay the debt service for that school. And I'm sure if that was to happen, you'd get overwhelming support by the taxpayers.
Thank you. All right. Anyone else in the audience wish to come on up? I'll ask again. All right, seeing none, that's going to bring us to the end here. Any thoughts, comments from council members? Deb, go ahead.
Yeah, so just to follow up on that comment from Mr. Beasley about maintenance of effort and per pupil, what would be the amount should the council go in the other direction instead of a level funding, but look at a per pupil expenditure? What is that amount?
It's a calculation that is done through RIDE. So we'd have to reach out to Rhode Island Department of Education, get the updated figures for us to calculate, because the data does come from them. And then it's not only looking at the revenue piece, assessment would have to be done with the expenditures to make sure we're meeting all the mandates that we're required to meet, with the focus being on the BEP. And in the end, you need to have permission from Rhode Island Department of Education for approval. The previous town finance director and I had spoken to RIDE about this. At that date, there has been no successful districts that have been able to calculate on a per pupil basis. But again, that was maybe a year and a half ago. So that's the process that we would have to undertake in order to do that.
Thank you. So I do think that's information that would be really important this year above all the years. So when do you think, or how long do you think it would take for you to come back to the council, or just forward to Jim and he can give it to us? When do you think you could give it to the council so we'd have that piece of information?
I'll actually reach out to RIDE. I'll actually ask if Brian wants to join me, and we'll see if there have been any changes and when they'd be able to provide the data for us to calculate.
Thank you so much. I really do appreciate that. I think that would be helpful for all five of us to have that as we begin the process.
I do have a question for you, Raquel, with respect to that. So that's a statute or rule or regulation that allows for that, is that correct?
It is part of Rhode Island general law that does allow.
You said that no community has successfully implemented that?
That is correct. As
So
of
has there been communities that have attempted to implement it but have been unsuccessful?
Yes, when we spoke to Rhode Island Department of Education, there was one school district that did attempt it many, many years ago and was not successful because the reduction would force them to be under the requirements with regards to the BEP.
And can you tell us what statute or rule or reg that is, just for reference so we know it?
That one I don't know off the top of my head, Rhode Island general law, but I can get that one to you.
All right, thank you.
So I have a question just to follow up on that. If a district were to be successful in implementing that, would the town appropriation be able to be somewhere in between? Like, would
Yes, what you would do, it would become the lowest base that you could possibly go. So it would be the revenues to support all the mandates. You're required to fund contractual obligations, you're required to fund special education, you're required to fund transportation, and you're required to meet all the mandates under the BEP with regards to expenditure. So they calculate and assess that. That's the level that must be funded. They'll look at different revenue sources. The difference between the two is what the town the lowest a town could go to fund.
okay, thank you.
So Raquel, just to follow up on the question I have, when we say it was unsuccessful, that means it was challenged by a party as being in violation of the statute or rule regulation?
It was not approved by Rhode Island Department of Education because the revenue that when they did the calculations, the revenue wasn't enough to support the BEP. So therefore, the calculation was null and void, and it went back to the level of maintenance of effort. There's actually a memo that was provided to us by Rhode Island Department of Education that the commissioner had wrote to that school district and municipality saying why they were not successful with calculating on a per pupil basis.
That could be remedied by increasing the town appropriation, just not to the level of level funding that was used in the past.
It
The town
could.
appropriation could come up just enough to meet that
Right.
threshold.
In that case,
theory.
the level of maintenance of effort dollar amount was the lowest they could go.
Do you recall the name of that municipality? I feel like it was Cranston, but I feel like maybe,
I think it was East Greenwich.
okay. So it was, see, what's curious to me is they create a law and a way to do something and then don't support it. So there must be a way to do per pupil expenditure that meets and fulfills the law, correct?
I think it was around the time of the funding formula when districts, using the example of Barrington, were overfunding a school district. At that point, even coming down a little bit would still meet the maintenance of effort per pupil. Again, it has to be there has to be a significant reduction in enrollment. And again, every district in Rhode Island is suffering with this. And then on the expenditure side, all mandates must be met. And so when we spoke to Rhode Island Department of Education, that's what they gave us, that there was one district that went through with it and was unsuccessful.
So, Jess Rose, just to be clarifying what you're asking is it possible if the level of funding is 55.6 million and the per pupil expenditure is 52 million, could the council appropriate a compromise amount? Is that what you're asking?
That's correct.
Yeah, I definitely think we definitely want that amount so that we can make a good decision for the community, especially given all of this huge capital expenditure ahead of us. Not everyone is here all the time, but I do want to point out that many times we have senior citizens come and speak very powerfully about affordable, continuing to be able to afford to live here. We all know that even though employment looks good, we have all the daily necessities are very, very high and inflated. If you shop at the grocery store, you know that. Gas continues to be high, so I want to be mindful to everyone that this is a conversation where we need to think about the people that aren't here tonight that came all last term and talked about expanding the elderly tax abatement program, talked about their, paying their taxes and continuing to make the bills. I mean, Martha's not here tonight, but she does say that, so represent Martha. Just to keep that in mind as we make a lot of big decisions, we need to consider all 30,000 people and the people that aren't here tonight as well.
All right, thank you, Deb. Any other thoughts from council members? Yeah, go ahead, Kate.
Just ask you a clarifying question about the topic you were just on. So when it comes to per pupil compensation, does it include funding for our students that go to charter schools? Because we fund that as well. So would it include our enrollment in the seat plus the kids that we pay when they go to the CTE and when they go to charter schools? Because they may not be in our seats, but we're still responsible for their cost.
Right, so there are two parts to it. One is the calculation from the revenue side, but that is only one part of the calculation. What we would need to do is develop the budget and present it to RIDE from the expenditure side. So this isn't a calculation where I can take an Excel spreadsheet, work with RIDE and say, here it is. I don't think it'll be done soon, but we'll start the process and I will reach out to RIDE to have a call with Brian. And you're right, Kate, when you're looking at the funding that comes from the state aid formula, it doesn't include funding from all these other things. We talk about the funding formula. The funding formula doesn't provide in their basic calculation for transportation. That's something above and beyond. At any given point, say if we were to do this calculation and all of a sudden 10 students go to out of district or special education happens, now our expenditure threshold rises. It's very fluid. But again, we will research it and we'll bring back to you what Rhode Island Department of Education says.
Thank you. I certainly know it's the holidays and it's crazy and everyone's doing lots of different things. Do you think like you need 30 days? You know, your budget.
The governor hasn't even released the revenue side of it. Again, there's one part of it which is calculating revenue on per pupil, but that doesn't mean that that's the dollar amount. You have to wait, and they'd have to do an assessment of our budget and compare it to the BEP and all the mandates, 3% of the budget for maintenance, meeting the threshold or the dollar amount for special education. I just don't think it would be anytime soon. I don't want to give a time frame because I can't speak for Rhode Island Department of Education. All I can do is research it and bring that research back to you along with Brian.
All right, thank you, Raquel. Any other final thoughts? Deb?
So the next meeting is January 5th, and there's no chance that you might have that information by then, correct?
Again, I cannot speak for Rhode Island Department of Education. I don't do the calculation. They do.
All right, Kate, go ahead.
I just want to follow up with that number as far as the enrollment goes, because while our enrollment census has us at 2509, if we include the 222 kids, we are responsible financially for 2731. So we're not looking at, I would like to think, we're funding the children who are not in our seats, along with their transportation to those other seats. So the number that I would assume we would be looking at is 2,731 students.
And coming out of post-pandemic, the reason that Rhode Island Department of Education held us harmless for any reduction in state aid because they said it wasn't fair and equitable to do so in the difficult times that we were going through.
So I have a different topic. So the school building committee has met most of the fall. I just was curious if you could share what steps for the community and we're both in the same room at the same time. Jim, if you could tell us what next steps we'll be taking?
We've met 13 times since August. We are at a point now where things are starting to come in focus, but we really need to pick a location if we're going to build a new high school. And that is something, that's why we went to the town council at the last meeting a week ago for some type of direction. So that is probably one of the biggest things on our minds right now, is helping us narrow that focus so that we can get some definitive plans to the school committee and for the town council, so they have they're well-informed when they start making these very, very tough decisions. I do think we're making good progress, and we've narrowed it down quite a bit. And so really there's three options right now. There's knock down, build new, or build new somewhere, right? There's new, renovate, or deferred maintenance. And each one has a substantial price tag. You know, the new, we're using that 125 number. Renovate using the 65 number, and deferred maintenance is still in the $40 to $50 million range. We haven't put a lot of money in these buildings over the years. So that's where we're at.
So at the meeting on Thursday, Luke Murray said he was going to send a letter to the school committee asking them to determine a location. Do you know what agenda that school committee meeting will take that up?
I don't. Luke is here if you want to ask that question, but I don't have a date, and I don't know if the letter went out yet.
Okay.
That letter hasn't gone out yet, so in fairness, I haven't gotten an agenda date because they probably haven't received that correspondence. My hope would be to get it out it will be out this week, and then my hope would be to get a response back to be on an agenda in January sometime.
All right.
Would we, as a council, be taking a vote on the location of the high school, or is that just a school committee vote?
So that's a good question, and I asked that today to some people in the know. So I'm not a legal, I'm not a solicitor, but I'll give you an answer that I think. So the school committee would really pick the project, but the council would have to give a vote of some type where they would say, we would only fund a high school if it is at this location. Which, whether that's up to the council to see if that's an appropriate question or agenda item.
Jim, just to clarify what you're saying here. So there needs to be council approval for submission to the next part of the stage submission here to RIDE. So in effect, if we were to say we would only support a certain direction, that's pretty much saying we'll only cast a vote in support of submission of the next stage to RIDE for a certain project or location.
I would say yes, but Luke, he's the subject matter expert on that.
So yes, effectively, that is the answer. So council's role and framework is really the budget, the funding mechanism, and then school committee really is supposed to set the program per RIDE. So they lay down. Now, you have purview over the budget, so effectively, if you said, we're not going to approve a submission to stage two and less, or we wouldn't vote to fund unless, then that's certainly direction. And that's some of the direction I'm looking for and the building committee's looking for now. So even before we get to the stage two process, we obviously don't want to move in a direction and have a final vote on the stage two submission and see it fail. So it would be nice to get that direction by either body sooner than later, whether you have apprehensions of funding one mechanism or there's a programming model that the school committee would like to see. So my intent would be, as part of the correspondence, to request that feedback from the school committee, and then we'd also be coming back to council because, as you know, we haven't received a definitive answer on the financials of the project.
So Luke, how about we also send that correspondence to the council?
Okay.
Let's get that on the agenda as well.
Okay.
Well-
I mean, we can CC the council on it. Are you saying direct it to the council, or?
They already voted to do one thing.
So, yeah, could you CC it to the council? I mean, we could always ask it to be on a council agenda. We're well in advance of when the next regularly scheduled town council meeting is.
I will do that. Yes.
All right, thank you.
So to be clear, I think we're all saying a similar thing. We would like on the town council agenda to have a vote on the location of the high school on our January meeting. Oh, I see a lot of nods. Awesome. So, do we just have, is it just a discussion item, Jim? Or do we have to give you a specific?
Once again, I think it would have to be, you would only fund the project at that specific site, which would give us direction and really narrow things down. That's the decision the council has to make if they want to go down that path.
Great, thank you.
I hate to have Luke keep popping up and down, but at the last building
Here all night.
meeting, I thought the process that you were looking for was the direction from the council at the last meeting that we had, and then take it to the school committee, and then from their deliberations, it comes back to the council.
It's a bit of chicken and egg at this point, right? I didn't want to press for a decision. We know it was a lot of information at the previous meeting, right? So we said we'd come back in January. Depending on the agenda for the school committee, they're going to give us some programmatic input. Now, it may move in the direction you'd like it to. If it doesn't, then you could certainly assert through the budget process and the financial information you give us on some additional direction, if that makes sense. So both bodies have their respective lane and have some purview on project direction. It's just how you go about it.
So
Make sense?
Yeah. Is it possible to have a conversation now? It is the topic. I mean, could we just sort of inform, we're very rarely in the same space. Is it possible to talk about the project?
Mr. President, it's not on our agenda, and therefore we couldn't engage in any in-depth conversation, we being the school committee and the administration.
Mhm. I guess I'm just hoping that we could move this quickly. We could determine that component more quickly so that the committee, the school building committee, could rev up. It's December 19th, and really that we have 375 days to sign a contract, so I'm just trying to not push this out 3.5 more weeks. If you don't meet until the middle of January, it's 3.5 weeks where it just puts, and I'm just trying to
So,
start the engine.
Jim or Luke, you can come up. What we're shooting for submission of stage 2 is by June 15th, is that correct?
June 1st.
June 1st, okay. And we got this, it's going to be on the agenda for the school committee's first meeting in January.
That's the plan.
So hopefully they give direction. And what date is that meeting, Mark?
That's 3 weeks from now. It's
It's like the 17th.
What's the date?
I think it's the 17th.
17th?
It's a month. So I'm just,
So then, following that meeting, it should be on our agenda for the
I'm
23rd.
sorry, point of
Well-
correction, the 10th, the second Tuesday, so it's the 10th.
10th.
My apologies.
Okay. I think procedurally, it should go to the school committee first and then come to the council. They'll put it on our January 23rd agenda.
Yeah, I'll speak in plain English. I'm respectfully asking the school committee to please look at this and help us get some clear direction. If you want a new high school, please tell us where you want it. If you want us to renovate, please tell us that. We're at that point where we need direction from the school committee, so I'm respectfully asking that you have a meeting when practical, and please help us move this along.
so I was just going to respectfully ask that you possibly consider having a special meeting, a short special meeting, so that it saves us more time.
On behalf of the committee, we appreciate that you're waiting for us to give you some guidance. However, we would like our time that's due to us, because just like you right now, we're not sure what direction we're going in as opposed to what we need to do or want to do. So we need that little bit of time too, and we're not meeting into the 7th, in the 15th? The 10th, I'm sorry. I thought you said the 7th. But anyway, we're not meeting into the 10th and not meeting anytime in between there. So when we come to the table on the 10th, we're going to have the discussion. However, that doesn't mean that we're going to walk away from that table that night with our decision. So hopefully we can guide each other and get to a conclusion of where we're going and how we're going to get there. But I respectfully ask for our time.
If I may, Madam Chair, this is not on the agenda. We are out of bounds. We need to come back in bounds. Please.
If it helps, the school building committee is not scheduled to meet until after the school committee date. And I think at this point, we're okay on time. We expected to have, we're shooting for the end of January to really have a lot of these decisions made. So I think we have a little bit of time capsule to work within. We planned on the holidays on the master schedule, so in fairness to everybody, I'm just putting that out there. The school building committee, I think is in a pretty good place right now. We can absorb a little bit of the float time that's gonna go on.
All right, thank you, Luke.
When the school committee's finished its deliberations, the council could also have a special meeting just for this topic.
All right, so it's going to be on the school committee's agenda for that January 10th. We'll see how they come out. Subsequent to that, we'll have it on our agenda for discussion as well. And then hopefully the school building committee will have some affirmative guidance as to what direction to pursue at that time. I think that's reasonable. We got to respect their time, what they're working on. So, makes sense to me. Anyone have any final thoughts before we end here? All right, thank you for everyone's time. Thank you to the school committee. Thank you for town staff, school staff for an informative presentation, a historical perspective, and a high-level view of what's to come next. And happy holidays to everyone. And stay tuned. We have a few meetings January 4th and January 5th on the CIP, so stay tuned. Thank you.